Life is not fair. Some people start on easy mode, others start on hard mode, and no matter how hard both work, they will never be equal. Here's why. There's a story you've heard 1,000 times. Guy starts with nothing, sleeps in his car, eats gas station sushi for 3 years, works 18-hour days, suffers more, loses everything once, rebuilds, suffers again. And then one day, boom, he's on a podcast with a ring light and a motivational quote on the wall telling you that suffering is actually the secret to success. Inspiring stuff. Very relatable, almost too relatable. Then there's the other guy, born into a family with a last name that opens doors, a dad who knew a guy who knew a guy, and a trust fund that kicked in at 18. Starts a company, gets a Forbes feature. Calls himself an entrepreneur, posts content about his journey. You've been told these two people are opposites. One earned it, one didn't. One is a hero, one is a cautionary tale. Clean story, easy to retweet, also mostly wrong. Understanding how it's wrong might actually change how you think about money, success, and whether that podcast guy was really eating gas station sushi or whether someone was paying his rent while he did it. First, let's deal with the numbers, because the internet lies to you constantly. Most people assume that rich people inherited their wealth. Old money, old family, old portrait hanging in a hallway that smells like mahogany and entitlement. The data disagrees. Over 2/3 of millionaires are self-made, according to studies by WealthX and Fidelity Investments. A separate survey found that 79% of millionaires received zero inheritance from their families at all. So statistically, the rags to riches story is more common than the trust fund story, which sounds very motivating. Almost too motivating, because this is exactly the moment where the word self-made starts doing a lot of suspicious heavy lifting. The problem with the word self-made, it is 9 letters long and it is lying to your face. Take Jeff Bezos, garage startup. Scrappy origin story. What usually gets left out is that Bezos got a $250,000 loan from his parents when he needed to grow Amazon into the world's largest bookstore. Not the worst starting position. Meanwhile, his grandfather was a regional director at the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. So the bootstraps were real, just slightly more expensive bootstraps than the average person owns. Or take Donald Trump, who famously described his father's financial support as a small loan of $1 million. The New York Times later reported the actual number was closer to $413 million across various transfers and deals, which is, by most definitions, not a small loan. That's just math. Then there's Kylie Jenner, who Forbes called a self-made billionaire. Their definition being that she didn't directly inherit her money. She used her own earned income to fund her first batch of lip kits. Technically accurate. Also, she had 100 million Instagram followers before the company launched because she grew up on a globally televised reality show. So yes, she built the business herself. She also started from a base camp that most entrepreneurs will never get to stand on. None of this means these people didn't work. Some of them worked incredibly hard. It just means self-made has a sliding scale that Wall Street Journal profiles tend to conveniently forget to mention. Here's the real difference nobody talks about: the cost of failure. This is the one that actually matters. If Facebook had failed in year 1, Mark Zuckerberg could have gone back to Harvard, and financial success would still have been statistically likely for him given his family's background. A failed startup for someone with that kind of safety net is a character-building chapter, maybe a book deal. Now compare that to John Coombe, co-founder of WhatsApp. Coombe emigrated from Ukraine and grew up on food stamps. He didn't have a computer until he was 19 and taught himself computer networking in his spare time. When Coombe was building WhatsApp, failure wasn't a learning experience. It was just failure. There was no floor, no parent to call, no couch to land on. Same goes for Oprah Winfrey. Born to a single teenage mother in rural Mississippi, Oprah grew up in poverty, and her path to a multi-billion-dollar media career was built entirely without a financial safety net. When things went wrong for Oprah, and things went wrong, there was no plan B that involved calling dad. She was the plan. That's the invisible variable everyone skips when they compare born rich to self-made. It's not the work. Both groups can work hard. It's what happens when the work doesn't work. Now, let's talk personality. because this is where it gets genuinely strange. Research on wealthy people found they tend to score higher on risk tolerance, emotional stability, openness, and conscientiousness. Basically, the psychological profile of someone who bets big doesn't spiral when the bet loses and still shows up Monday morning. Then the researchers split the group: people who built their money versus people who inherited it. The risk tolerance, the conscientiousness, the openness. All of it was significantly more prominent in self-made millionaires than in those who inherited their wealth, which makes complete sense once you think about it for 5 seconds. If you've never had to take a real risk to get where you are, you never had to build the muscle. The floor was always there. You didn't need to get comfortable with falling, because you were never actually falling. You were just rearranging furniture on the ground floor. Richard Branson, who started his first magazine from a church basement at 16 and was told by his headmaster he'd either end up a millionaire or in prison, has a very different relationship with risk than someone who inherited a hotel chain. Branson's risk tolerance wasn't a personality trait he was born with. It was a skill he built because he had no other option. The headmaster, by the way, was half right. Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, started the company with $5,000 in personal savings and faced rejection from manufacturers before getting the product off the ground. She had no family money, no industry contacts, and was selling fax machines door to door before the idea hit. When she pitched Spanx and got laughed at, there was nothing comfortable to go back to. Rejection was just Tuesday. Compare that energy to someone whose company can hemorrhage money for years because dad is still writing checks. Different sport. Different stakes. Here's the one that'll actually surprise you. If you asked most people which group has more empathy for poor people, someone born rich or someone who grew up broke and made it, most people would guess the self-made person. They know the struggle. They lived it. They get it. Contrary to popular belief, rich individuals who rose from humble beginnings actually view socioeconomic advancement as less challenging and show less empathy toward the poor compared to those born into wealth. Read that again. The explanation is something like this. If you made it out, your brain quietly rewrites the story. The path wasn't that hard because you did it. It becomes an ego protection mechanism that dresses itself up as a life philosophy. I made it, so anyone can make it. The struggle gets romanticized and then weaponized. John Paul DeJoria, co-founder of Paul Mitchell Hair Products and Patron Tequila, who was literally homeless before founding a global hair care brand with just $700, has spoken publicly about wanting to give back precisely because he remembers what no floor feels like. But not everyone who makes it keeps that memory intact. A lot of them quietly decide the system is fair because they won. Meanwhile, the person born rich has no reason to believe the system is fair. They didn't need it to be. So sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they're more willing to admit it isn't. Nobody is the hero in this story. That's the point. So what does the actual day-to-day look like? Born rich people have what you'd call a soft landing network, not just money, people. Something goes sideways in the business, a phone call happens, a career needs a pivot, someone pulls a string. Anderson Cooper is a legitimately talented journalist. He's also the heir to the Vanderbilt fortune, one of America's most prominent families, and inherited his wealth from his mother, Gloria Vanderbilt. Did that open doors? Probably not 0 doors. Self-made people, meanwhile, are playing a game where the timeline is much longer than anyone sold them. The average self-made millionaire worked, saved, and invested for 28 years before reaching $1 million, with many not getting there until around age 49. Not 25, not after one viral post, not at the end of a TED Talk. 49. After nearly 3 decades of decisions that looked boring from the outside and were terrifying from the inside. The podcast guy who says he made it in 2 years either got extremely lucky or had financial support he's not mentioning, or is selling you a course. Possibly all 3. And the mindset gap runs deeper than people admit. The data on generational mobility is genuinely uncomfortable. Research found that 90% of people born in 1940 ended up richer than their parents, compared to just 40% of those born in 1980. The whole outwork your circumstances dream is mathematically harder now than it has ever been. The inspirational speech about it, though, That hasn't changed at all. Wealthy people generally believe that all people are getting wealthier and that the circumstances which create wealth are largely fair. But income inequality in the United States is higher than in any country in the G7. They're not lying. The game just looks completely different depending on which side of the board you're sitting on. Self-made people often overcorrect in the opposite direction. They become so proud of the solo narrative that they quietly erase the mentor who took a chance on them, the relative who let them sleep on their couch through the hard years, or the economic moment they happened to enter at exactly the right time. Ralph Lauren grew up poor and built an empire. He started selling ties and turned his vision into one of the most recognizable fashion brands in history. But he also happened to catch a wave in American consumer culture that rewarded exactly what he was building at exactly the time he was building it. Timing is a form of luck that no one puts on their Forbes profile. Nobody is completely self-made. The only real question is how far back you're willing to trace the help. So what do you do with all of this? If you were born into money, the useful move isn't guilt, it's accuracy. Your work may be real, your hustle may be real, but your floor was real too, and most people don't have one. Admitting that doesn't make your success smaller, it just makes your understanding of other people's situations larger. If you're building something from scratch, the gap is real, the stakes are real, and it will take longer than the story you were sold. But here's the actually useful part. The research suggests that the traits which lead to self-made wealth are a cause of becoming wealthy, not just a consequence of it. Risk tolerance, resilience, conscientiousness. These are built, not inherited, not downloaded, built through the exact uncomfortable situation you're already standing in. Which means the gas station sushi years aren't just suffering, they're installation. Whether that makes you feel better or worse probably depends on how many gas stations you've visited lately.